What if we've been asking the wrong question for over 20 years? For years, people shouted, "Bush did 9/11," a slogan, a meme, a conspiracy phrase repeated so many times it almost lost all its meaning. But what if that phrase missed the bigger picture entirely? Because when you really go back and study September 11th, study the timeline, the chain of command, and who was giving orders, and who gained power afterward, one name almost always keeps reappearing. Not George W. Bush, but Dick Cheney. And no, this episode isn't going to sit here and claim there's some magic smoking gun proving Cheney orchestrated the attacks. That's not the point. The point is this. On the most chaotic day in modern American history, while Bush was flying around the country on Air Force One, Dick Cheney became the operational center of American power. And after that day, his influence exploded. The wars, the surveillance, the intelligence expansion, the executive power, the defense contracts, and the fear machine. 9/11 changed America forever. But maybe we've been pointing at the wrong man this entire time. Welcome back to PSIND. So before 9/11, Dick Cheney wasn't some random politician standing behind the president at press conferences. This was a man deeply rooted inside the defense establishment. I'm talking former Secretary of Defense, White House Chief of Staff, Congressman, and the CEO of Halliburton, one of the biggest defense contractors on earth. Cheney understood military power, intelligence systems, government continuity plans, and emergency authority. And more importantly, he believed the executive branch should have enormous power during national emergencies. That matters. Because after 9/11, America entered a permanent state of emergency. And Dick Cheney was perfectly positioned for it. So here's where things start getting a little uncomfortable. On the morning of 9/11, President Bush was in Florida reading to school children when the attacks unfolded. Eventually, he boarded Air Force One and spent hours moving from location to location while security concerns spread across the country. Meanwhile, Dick Cheney was taken into the Presidential Emergency Operations Center beneath the White House, or otherwise known as the bunker. And according to multiple officials and later testimony, Cheney wasn't just sitting there watching events unfold. He was issuing directives, military coordination, continuity of government procedures, shoot-down discussions, and airspace response. Now legally, yes, Bush was still the commander-in-chief. But operationally, a lot of Americans look back at that day and ask, who was actually running America's response that day? Because while Bush was airborne, Cheney became the nerve center. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's fact, and that's history. The vice president had become the central figure during the biggest emergency America had seen in generations. Now here's where the story just gets a little bit stranger, and it's going to have a little bit of a turn from like the topics that we're going on, but it still goes along the same thing. 2 of the 4 fighter pilots that were scrambled during the events of 9/11, otherwise known as the ones that were supposed to shoot United 93 down, 2 of those 4 fighters that got scrambled ended up becoming generals. And one of them is our lovely Dan Kane. Now, by itself, that doesn't prove some grand conspiracy, but details like that make people stop and think about how massively 9/11 reshaped the American military and intelligence world. Careers changed. Budgets exploded. Agencies expanded. And entire government structures transformed overnight. And meanwhile, the American public was terrified. Fear changes countries. Fear changes laws. And fear changes what citizens are willing to accept from government. And nobody understood that better than Dick Cheney. Because after 9/11, everything changed. The Patriot Act, mass surveillance, expanded intelligence powers, the war on terror, Afghanistan, then Iraq, Americans were told freedom itself was under attack, that the world had fundamentally changed, that extraordinary measures were now necessary. And through all of it, Cheney's influence kept growing, not shrinking, growing. He became arguably the most powerful vice president in American history, and some critics even called it a shadow presidency. And when you look back at the timeline, it's easy to understand why people became suspicious. Because the attacks didn't just change foreign policy, they changed the relationship between the American people and their government forever. So maybe the real question was never, Bush did 9/11? Maybe the more important question is, who controlled the response? Who benefited from the aftermath? And who gained power? Who shaped the next 20 years of American history? Because whether you believe the official narrative completely, or whether you think there are still unanswered questions, one fact is undeniable. After September 11th, Dick Cheney became one of the most influential figures America had ever seen. In the America that emerged afterward, the surveillance state, the endless wars, the intelligence expansion, and the culture of fear, it still exists today, 20 plus years later. And maybe that's why people still can't let 9/11 go. Not because they're crazy, but because they know deep down something about that day changed America permanently. And that's the episode. If you enjoyed this one, share it, like it, subscribe, because conversations like this are exactly what mainstream media avoids having. There's a difference between asking questions and blindly accepting everything you're told. And history becomes dangerous when people stop questioning power. I'm planning on dropping, I want to say 2 more episodes this week, but I know my one tomorrow or the day after. I'm not sure if I'm going to drop it tomorrow or Wednesday. Got to go into the Facebook group for that one. PSIND, by the way. But it's going to be... It's not a reflection. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but over the last probably 5 or 6 episodes, I've kind of told a story leading up to this episode. And I'm going to try to do that more or less moving forward. Kind of do like little formats of telling a story versus doing like... Because in my opinion, an hour-long podcast is something that's very hard to sit through, especially if you're, like, not at work and you're not, like, just doing something that you passively do, but to just sit there and listen to it. That's why I do smaller formats on my podcast. Like, I will do a larger format eventually, but this is kind of like the niche that I really enjoy because I can say what I want within, 10 to 15 minutes, and then from that, I can progress into another story the next day that kind of follows the prior, if that makes sense. Alright, that's all I got for this one. Until next time, stay aware, stay questioning, and stay independent. This is Cam from PSIND, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.